Committee meeting to order. Today is horse racing day. We've got a series of bills. They're similar. 2 constitutional amendments on pari-mutuel betting and 2 jobs growth acts of different types that are really horse racing bills, SB 30 and SB 212. Senator Billy Hickman has asked to have a presentation on the economic impact of horse racing. Senator Hickman has a lot of personal knowledge about the industry and some of the offshoots of that it may bring benefits to Georgia. And so I'm going to give you the floor first, Senator Hickman, to give us just a brief introduction. Then I know you have spent some time getting this economic impact study done, and we'll let you turn that over for a presentation. Then I would plan to hear from the other authors of their bills if they'd like to, and we have a number of people signed up from the public to be heard on the issue. So that's the way we'll go. We will go longer than 4 o'clock today. I don't want to go past 4:30ish if I can help it, but we'll see how the clock goes here. But we'll try to get the issues before the committee to help educate us. So with that, I'm going to recognize you, Senator Hickman. It's best that you go to the podium so that you can be on camera. People at home can see you, and you'll be mic'd up. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's an honor to be here, and I appreciate you and the committee members listening to this. It's a very interesting situation, but we're actually working off of Senate Bill 212, which is the Harry Gessinger Rural Jobs and Growth Act, and this was dropped in the 2021 session, and the original signers on the bill was Senators Mullis, Senator Harbison, Senator Miller, Senator Rhett, Senator Ginn, and myself. Many of you all know it's no secret that I have a huge passion for horse racing. And so it's, but at the same time I've got a huge passion, I gotta remember I'm a CPA, and that things have to make economic sense to me before to go any further. So when all this happened, we decided to start looking at some economic impacts of that. Many of y'all know also that my wife Joanne and I are very involved in horse racing. We raise them, we breed them, we race them, we sell them, we buy them, and sometimes we even give them away. In fact, we've actually given a couple of horses in the last 4 or 5 months to Senator Summers, who are either don't want to race anymore or just tired of it. So it's a very that type of situation. I'm currently licensed in Kentucky for horse racing, and I've been licensed in Florida, New York, California, Texas, Oklahoma, Iowa, around. So when Senator Mullis and I started talking about it, and I told him, I said, Senator Mullis, I love it, but I'm also very, we got to make sure it makes sense to us. So we started talking about trying to do an economic impact study, economic feasibility study on it, and it had to make sense to the state of Georgia to do it, to push it any further. So we got together and we raised the money and hired Georgia Southern University to prepare a study on economic impact of horse racing in Georgia. And it was really was no cheap process. We feel very good. 6 individuals, you have got, committee members, you've got this study in a bound version inside your folders, and I would encourage you to look at it and study it. Really, it's pretty easy to understand. But it actually was a culmination of about 2.5 months of work. And it was headed up by Dr. Dominic Hallaby, who was here, Dr. Tony Barilla, Ben Mckay, who was here, Chelsea Reimers, Suzanne Hallman, and Phil Boehm. And now I'd like to turn it over to them, Dr. Hallaby and Mr. Ben Mckay, who are with the Center for Business Analytics and Economic Research at Georgia Southern. And then when they get through, I'd like to come back with some closing comments.
Before you do, let me ask you a couple of little basic questions. What type of license do you have to have? Is this to breed horses, to train horses, to race them?
No, sir. You don't have to have a license to breed them. But you do have to have a license to train, and you have to have a license to be an owner to race them. And it's a very extensive fingerprint background check on you, and you really have to go each state for the most part, each state has its own license. Now, I don't do this, but I think you can get a license that covers all states, but mine is just individual states.
But the state of Georgia does not require you to have a license to raise and train, breed horses here?
No,
and
sir.
go race them in other states?
No, sir. No,
Okay.
well, because we don't have parimutuel racing. Now, if you with parimutuel racing, that's where the license comes into play.
Okay. And, you know, you mentioned that you're in the business here in Georgia. I've always been puzzled, why do you have to have horse racing legalized in this state in order for there to be a horse breeding, horse training industry? You know, you can raise horses here, and you've just shown us you can race them all over the country.
Right.
So why can't Georgia do this without parimutuel betting?
Well, with parimutuel betting, you know, really in order to race horses, you need to have purses. You know, we don't just get out on dirt roads and run up and down dirt roads. So in order to have some facilities and all that would be commensurate with the racing, you have to have a way to fund the purses, put money in the purses, and you get that through people betting on the races. And there's all kind of, as we all know, there's a lot of different ways to bet, but the betting is at the tracks in this case.
Okay, but you can raise and train horses in Georgia and take them to race to win the purses in other states if you want to, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
In fact, we have done that in our situation, our farm in Georgia, but we've quit doing that. And quite honestly, very tragically, we had a horse pass away a couple of weeks ago, and one of our thoroughbreds mares, and our area doesn't have. We got a lot of small animal vets, but we don't have large animal vets. And consequently, a lot of you go down in Florida, they just got hundreds of large animal vets, and of course in Kentucky. And Joy and I made the decision to never do that again at our house, because it's just, you know, when you watch something pass away, whether it be a rabbit on the side of the road or a family member, it's a tragic situation. It's kind of tough to deal with. So we made a decision not to do it anymore in Georgia. So we have now moved our horses to Florida, our brood mares in Florida, and we foal out down there and then ship them up to Kentucky to be rebred. And then once they're rebred and they're safe in foal, we'll send them back to Florida.
Okay. And several years ago, Senator Beach had a similar bill, and they were talking about trying to bring the Breeders' Cup or let it have an event here in Georgia. But the entire basis of the bill, as I remember, there was only going to be a few weeks of racing per year in Georgia. I want to say there were 2 or 3 weeks in October, maybe 2 or 3 in the spring. It kind of like a circuit going from. So that has always puzzled me, how having races here maybe 4 weeks a year is enough to support an entire industry.
Well, I think as everything does, time change and concepts change and some other things type of change. But Senate Bill 212 is referencing 3 racetracks. One probably in the South Atlanta area, somewhere. It's got to be within a certain number of miles of a major airport, and then probably 2 more in maybe the Savannah, St. Mary's area, because St. Mary's is so close to Jacksonville, Florida, and such a huge population in Jacksonville. And then one other, but these bills require, the bill Senate 12 requires 60 days of racing at each track. So in essence, instead of having the 20 that you're saying, it would be actually 180 days of racing in Georgia, 60 at each track.
Okay. Senator, again, you're recognized for a question. Did you raise your hand?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Said he talked about all these races he's in with these horses. I wondered who was winning, him or the horse?
Most of the time, the horses, yeah.
All right.
And that's why I said it's got to make economic sense. And I'm sure when y'all see the numbers that the Georgia Southern University people have, I think it's pretty astounding, the economic impact that this could bring to Georgia. Right. And you mentioned the Breeders' Cup a few minutes ago, and the Breeders' Cup right now is running in California and Kentucky. And I think you got in your pamphlet, you'll see a letter that Dean Reeves got from the head of Breeders' Cup that's like a Super Bowl for horse racing, and that could be as high as probably $90 to $100 million economic impact if we had a Breeders' Cup in Georgia. And that's a series of races on a Friday and a Saturday.
All right. Thank you. Okay, let's hear from Georgia Southern.
Thank you.
you would introduce yourself, and so we can have you on the record.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Senator Hickman, for the invitation and the introduction, and thank you, Chair Cowsert and the members of this committee for gracing me the honor of your time. I am Dominic Hallaby. I'm the Associate Provost for Innovation and Commercialization and the Director of the Business Innovation Group here at Georgia Southern University, the largest institution of higher education in our state, south of the city of Atlanta. I get the privilege of overseeing the business development units there for our institution, which includes 3 of our innovation incubators spread across 5 different cities in South Georgia, including more than 43,000 square feet of space, 1 connected through our own Department of Agriculture through our Georgia Grown Innovation Center, as well as our fabrication lab helping entrepreneurs as well as industry partners develop and create new innovative concepts. The one here today that we talk about is our Center for Business Analytics and Economic Research, where we focus heavily on helping policymakers and industry leaders understand economic change and what that can mean in terms of creating new opportunities and jobs for Georgians. So when this opportunity was presented to us, we took that as a quick opportunity to jump and to help understand what this new segment of the horsing industry could mean for our particular state. In order to do that, what we really focused in on is understanding what's currently happening in the equine industry in Georgia. What are the dynamics, where are the linkages, and where are the processes by which our existing horse industry has, and how do we quantify that particular event? What we did beyond that was really start to look in greater detail in terms of what is happening in other states and where do we as a state stand the path to most develop towards in 10 years. We exempted states like Kentucky, Florida, and New York, which are stalwarts in the horse racing industry, and really focused in aggressively on the smaller states, the Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Maryland, and others, to get a greater sense of those activities as laying the framework for us as a state to be able to emulate and move forward. Just to give you a sense of some of the activities that we looked at in great deal, of course, are the types of foals that were being developed, the age, the sales, the dollar amounts, the entire breeding industry, as well as the training, the activities that's happening in our state, as well as the educational opportunities in other states and how those can lend out, as well as looking in greater detail in terms of that entire process from veterinary services, as well as the housing and training of those particular athletes. Now, one of the things that really excited us as we move forward is that understanding those linkages in those other states laid the foundation for what we were happening or anticipate to happen within 10 years in Georgia. From there, we created a great sense of understanding in terms of what those economic conditions could be and what our current state and future state can look forward towards. Now, I would like to go ahead and kind of jump right in and invite Ben Mckay, our Assistant Director of Business Research and the lead number cruncher for this particular report, so that he can walk you through some of the details and for the other members in the audience to be able to see some of the details that we're talking about economically.
Thank you, Dr. Hallaby, members of the committee, Senator Hickman, and all that. Looking forward to sharing this information with everyone today. So, kind of from our initial look at this project, we went ahead and started with the national. Let's see if the clicker works here. Okay, cool. All right, so we started by taking a look at the national horse industry and kind of focused in on that piece to really set the stage for our analysis to understand what we were looking at and what kind of an impact should we expect, and then what kind of an area are we focusing in on? So these numbers are from 2017, and they were provided to us by the American Horse Council, and they are really telling us a couple of very important facts. And the first one is that the racing industry is the largest segment within the horse sector. So as we look at our state and really began to break that down, we wanted to make sure to highlight that fact to all. So once we kind of looked at that, we did take a little bit of a look at the tracks. and kind of have a better idea of where the industry is at and how it's developing over time. This industry, because so much of it was face-to-face and all of that, did have a big impact from the COVID-19 pandemic, which is one of the reasons why you see the decline in revenues and employment and wages in the horse racing industry and really across that. These are expected to turn around. That's kind of where we see this going, and by the end of 2025 we should be back to where we were in 2020, 2019 in terms of both races, purses, and those types of areas. So with that information, we were able to build on that. And one of the areas that we truly wanted to focus on to help guide our discussions and understanding of this industry is not just the broad numbers and kind of where it is, but what's the breakdown of the current industry in Georgia and how that provides a basis for being able to understand what could happen if horse racing is added to this area. So we started by looking at the purchases that are made by the current industry, and then really breaking that down in trying to build out our understanding from there. And we found that about 69% of purchases made by the industry are made within the state, and the rest are coming from outside, which is a really strong percentage and really shows that all the Georgia being a strong agricultural state really holds true within the horse care market.
When you reference purchases, are you talking about purchases of horses or supplies and
supplies, materials, all of those ancillary things that you need to keep to keep a horse in proper order. So once we had that information, we started looking at, all right, so how do we break down the analysis and kind of really go in deep on what the horse industry is doing currently. So right now in Georgia, about 78,000 horses were sold in 2019, and those sales generated about $246 million in farm gate sales, which translated to an overall impact between those two figures of about 282 million. So that was the kind of the basis that we had for the current industry in Georgia and the current equine production. So once we ran that through our model, it really created about 5,600 jobs related directly to the equine industry, and then once the linkages are worked through and all of that, it's about 7,200 jobs are related to just the current industry with no additional information.
So we have 7,200 jobs in the equine industry now.
That's the total economic impact.
Is this just the feed and tax stores? I mean, what is? That's all I am aware of.
Well, those are our focus on the total as well. So those are the when you go out and when individuals within that area go out and spend their wages, that we're seeing a big spike in those communities from that spending. And then we're also seeing the tax stores and others going out and making purchases within that. So that's the whole industry. Direct, there's about 5,600 jobs.
Okay. That's current.
Yes, sir.
All right.
So once we had that information, we decided to make sure that we understood what the tax implication for the state would be and is from that initial spending. So we're at about 13.5 million in state tax collections from that spending. So as was stated earlier, we're looking at about 180 racing days. So once we began to build on this idea, we wanted to go ahead and add in the horse racing, because now we have the table set to understand what this could add to the state. And so we we have 180 days of racing across three tracks. The big information within this slide that I would want to highlight is we have about 10,800 starts, and that's the number of slots for horses to race in. Obviously, you're going to have more than one horse per race. You have more than one horse per race, and then horses race more times a year than just once. So once we look at that, we're looking at around 3,000 starters. So that's the number of horses that we will need to have a racing industry to meet the demand that's created by the 180 days of racing.
Are you presuming those will all be from Georgia?
We are presuming that some of them will be from Georgia, and we are also presuming that there will be a fair number, particularly initially, that are going to come from outside the state.
Okay.
And so one of the big ways that you get horses in your state is you have to start a breeding industry. So in year 3, after the bill's approved and racetracks are under construction, and there's an economic incentive to do that, we're assuming about 200, or we're estimating about 200 brood mares will join the state and begin to produce foals and do that piece. And so as that moves through the system, what ends up happening is that you have horses that'll begin to move into the racing industry from there. Obviously, not every horse that's born will become a racer, even if they are thoroughbred. There's desire, there's industry, there's injuries, or other factors that really play into whether or not a racehorse chooses to race. Which can impact it. But really, over time, we're looking at around 800 race horses being produced in Georgia, as from this if this legislation is approved. And so once we as we worked through that information, we know that these racehorses that are kept in other states and that are here, they're specialized athletes. They have trainers. They have everything that you would expect to see from a racing professional type environment. So where an average horse in the state would be about $8,800 a year to kind of maintain and hold. These racehorses average closer to more like $47,800 in overall. So it really drives up the impact. So by year 10, once the industry is fully moving forward, we're looking at about $64 million in spending related to the racehorses. So once we modeled that impact, we ended up with about 1,800 jobs direct across the spread throughout the state, and then about 2,600 total once all the indirect and induced categories were factored in. So once we have those pieces included in our model, and we're able to kind of build with that. We looked at the number of horses that would be sold, because not every breeder holds on to the horse until it finishes its 4 to 5 year racing career. And they're sold at a couple of different spots, usually within their racing life cycle. So really, by the end of the 10-year period, we're looking at about 223 horses changing hands across the state at about $55,900 per horse. So it's much more than the standard horse that you would have for other purposes within the industry.
So you're saying there's sales tax on those transactions, selling horses?
That would be a decision for this group to make.
And now on employment, hit me with that number one more time. What did you we got 7,200 now. You think it'll be?
I actually have I have all that in the final our final slide with all the impact figures.
Okay, I was just wondering how much you were saying the employment numbers went up, how many new people?
We're looking at about 28, I believe 2,800
Okay.
within that, from just that segment.
So you'd go from 7,200 to 2,800, you'd have 10,000 employees in the state?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, yeah. There's one last piece that we included in the model that I think will help to fully answer your question, Mr. Chairman. So once we had those pieces built into the model, we went ahead and expanded the projected racehorse sales, the average age, and those out. And once we had that 13 million included in there, we ended up with a total direct, to your question, of around 11,000. We'll call it 11,500 direct employees that would be working in the support of the racing industry, and about 15,800 total across the state once the indirect and the business-to-business transactions and the consumer-to-business transactions are included, which works out to about $1.28 billion impact from this new industry being included in the horse racing, or in the horse sector, excuse me.
That's the total wages of those employees?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's the total output. So really, a couple of major takeaways from this is that the Georgia horse industry is already strong. All horse racing will do is help to make it stronger and to become a bigger part of the agricultural industry. Really, this industry works with pari-mutuel betting. It makes it more exciting. There are only two races currently in Georgia right now without pari-mutuel, and neither one of them are flat track. So it should allow for an expansion of the industry with that included in there. And then the big takeaway is that we went ahead and we did some sensitivity. We made sure to draw out the initial the impact at the end of the 10 years will be significant with the 15,800 jobs and the 1.2 billion. And I'd be happy to answer any other questions that they have or send it back over to Senator Hickman.
Senator Tippins, you're recognized for a question.
Yes, sir. I have a question in your computation of new jobs in Georgia.
Yes, sir.
Say in the case of a farrier that may have 30 clients, and one of them would be a horse owner, do you count that farrier as an additional job in the state of Georgia? Or people who a portion of their time is allotted to that? How do you allocate a portion of a person's workload? How do you make that determination on full-time jobs? Or are you just talking about people who may be impacted a portion of their work week by racehorse, by racing?
It's really the portion of individuals that would be impacted by racing. I would hope that our racing industry would be strong enough eventually to have farriers that specialize in racehorses. It can be a very specialized process to care for those horses, and there's training required and other things like that. So,
but as it stands right now in your calculation of new jobs, that would be anybody whose livelihood would be affected by racing would be counted as one of these additional jobs. Is that correct?
yes, sir.
Other questions? Did you do any analysis of the pari-mutuel betting industry?
We briefly looked at pari-mutuel betting. If I remember correctly from the report, it's about $222 million following the Indiana example that we used in there.
Okay. And do you recall what type of tax rate Indiana has on that?
Not off the top of my head, sir.
Okay. Is that the state we're probably most similar to?
Yes.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you very much for your presentation.
All right. Thank you.
Lord, pretty tall guy. Let me just do a kind of little wrap up on that. They did a great job, and on this aspect of it, and not the bill, but just kind of a summary. I think we need what the takeaway is, that with the horse racing, we'll end up with probably another 8,500 new jobs in Georgia, $800 million economic impact, and that's $800 million in today's dollars, not 10 years from now. Big deal. And you think about that, Mr. Chairman, that's based upon 10,700,000 people in Georgia. You take Kentucky, the economic impact in Kentucky right now, which has been going on a good long time, is some 22,000 jobs based upon their website involved in the horse racing industry, and economic impact of $3 billion with 4.5 million people. So we're 2.5 times the size, and so that's why it's so significant there. If you also look at the numbers that we threw out in the report, is that 8,588 new jobs. Georgia Power, to put that in perspective, Georgia Power in Georgia employs, according to the websites, 8,300 people. Kennesaw State employs 6,250. Chick-fil-A right now employs 6,150. Synovus employs 4,651, and Lockheed Martin employs a little over 5,000. So this particular industry, moving this industry up, will be more significant employment than any of those industries are. And the majority of these jobs are going to be agriculture-related jobs, and it's going to be great for our rural areas and agriculture. And a couple of big incentives also to take away. There is no, in this bill 212, which we'll talk about again in a few minutes, there is no tax credits involved. There's no incentives by communities. There's no cutting of property tax or anything like that involved. It's just straight dollar for dollar. Now, you've got in your packet a good bit of information, and one of the information, Senator Tippins, you got is a chart that shows for every horse how many people involved with that horse, anywhere from farriers to chiropractors. And you in here, you may not realize, but there are horse chiropractors. There's horse acupuncturists. I've had horses that had chiropractor work done on them, so I know it works to them. And so you got farriers, you got veterinarians, and so forth and so on. So, but the reason the industry is, just like I kind of iterated a few minutes ago, is we're, for the most part, our operation is outside of Georgia, and if we bring that operation back in Georgia because of horse racing, there's going to be a lot more incentives for me as a breeder to raise and buy and sell in Georgia, and that's because we'll have breeder incentive funds that will be funded through this bill, and we'll also have state races, which is majority of races that will be funded through this. So right now we've got millions of dollars, literally millions of dollars, that are moving outside of Georgia to Kentucky and to Florida each year because the horse racing is not legalized in Georgia. So I appreciate it. Thank you. I'll take any questions from the committee.
Any questions? Are you speaking to the bills, the details of the bills?
I am.
I got a few that I'm not sure exactly which of the two bills they came from, but you mentioned they called for 3 tracks in the state.
Yes, sir.
Why not just let anybody that wants to open a track open a track?
Well, I think it's because one thing, it may not support it, and you know, as many of y'all in this room know, you have to have a certain number of horses in each race in order to have a race, and most of the tracks require at least 6 horses. And one thing, and I'll come back to that in just a second. One thing you kind of hit on, or someone hit on a few minutes ago, there is a tremendous movement from down the East Coast for horses. They've started up in New York, moved to Kentucky, from Kentucky to Florida, and Florida has year-round racing. So we have an opportunity here to capture a lot of those. You're talking about filling races. We have an opportunity in Georgia to capture a lot of those horses as they move in south. Not only the ones, as we grow over time, breeders will continue raising horses in Georgia.
Well, I've just heard people from parts of the state like Columbus or Augusta or Macon, Rome, Chickamauga even, that might want their own track. I woke you up there, didn't I, Chief?
Well,
we need that chiropractor to come work on his neck after that snap.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think one thing you'll see in the bill is the bill requires a minimum investment of $250 million for a track with around Atlanta area, and a minimum of $125 million investment for the 2 tracks in rural Georgia, or in other parts of Georgia. So I think that's going to be some limitation. Plus, I don't think if you look at Florida, Florida's got Gulfstream and got Tampa, and that's only 2 tracks in Florida. And Kentucky's only got 2 or 3 tracks. So you can't just all of a sudden flood it down there and expect people to come to them either.
Well,
Or you won't have horses
Wouldn't
out.
the free market just decide that? I mean, the people putting up that money to build
Well,
that track.
yes, sir, it very well. Free market could decide it if the purses are high enough, and the purses could be very. If the people are going to race horses where the purses are. You get a $50,000-$60,000 overnight allowance race. People are going to go there as opposed to a $20,000 allowance race, and racing in New York is really strong now because of some other incentives they got, because their purses are higher.
And the other question I have for you, this come up in different iterations over the years, is can this industry survive without other associated gambling? The slot machines or historical racing machines, or the beamed in live shows from Australia or whatever, the off the track betting. Seriously, they race them in France and Australia and all around the world, right?
Well,
Dubai.
we all know that they do race all around the world. There's two full-time horse racing channels on TV that you can watch, and you go late at night, you'll be watching from Australia. My personal opinion is that we need some other form to get the quality of horses here, to get the Breeders' Cup here. I mean, I really believe that the pari-mutuel betting could survive on its own, but you wouldn't have the quality of races that we would want, that Georgia's so well known to be the eighth best state in the nation to do business on. Well, we also would want these facilities to be the best in the nation also, and I think you got to have other forms of money to supplement the purses in order to get us there.
I attended a Nickel G's conference in Austin, Texas back in December, and one of the reasons I went is there was a session or program that was called Horse Racing Industry at the Crossroads. And the gist of the presentation was that it's a dying industry, and the only way it can survive is having casino gambling associated with the racinos, they call them, with the slot machines. And there was quite a bit of lively discussion about whether it could be a freestanding industry without being attached to other forms of gambling. I just wondered if you.
Well,
you guys
this
know the
particular
industry.
bill, Senate 212 bill, patterns that after Kentucky and some of the other states, and they're called, whereas slot machines are random number generated winners. These machines, there are machines, and these machines are based on 100,000 prior horse races, and so they tell us that those are not slot machines, just like the co-am machines are not slot machines. So
They look like them, sound like them, cost the same, pay out the same. They just calculate what's going to come up on the dial by an algorithm that fed in 100,000
that's correct.
previous races.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you were a autistic savant genius and knew the winner of every race in the history of sports racing, that would not help you win or lose on these machines.
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. All right. Other questions? What's happening, Chickamauga?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator, for bringing this.
Yes,
and we
sir.
appreciate your work and time in bringing your presentation. Very important to this decision that we'll hopefully make soon. Anyway, Senator Hickman,
Yes, sir.
I appreciate your knowledge of this industry. Now, I am not knowledgeable of this industry, but I believe it will be good for Georgia, and it will help Georgia in many things. I mean, you never know what could be connected to this Sports Hall of Fame in Macon, or rural health care, or Hope Scholarship, or other things. But the main thing is it will provide lots of jobs, good jobs, not ill repute jobs, but good jobs for people of Georgia. And thank you for working this issue. I know it's my bill, but you're the expert. I have expertise in some in a couple of items.
Yeah.
And thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Councilman
Thank y'all.
Comment.
Thank you for allowing me to do it.
All right, thank you. I have 4 people signed up to speak. I'll start with John. Is it Kenolt? Am I pronouncing that right?
It's Kent, like
Kent. Oh, that's a D, not an OL.
In German, like kindergarten.
All right.
Obviously live up to that.
Come on up and introduce yourself. Tell us your thoughts on these bills. We had a sign-up sheet for all four, the two constitutional amendments and the two enabling legislations. You are free to talk about them as a general subject matter or any specifics you'd like to for us.
Well, I think I'll just do it generally speaking. First of all, I've got 4 earned graduate degrees, 3 of them in law, JD, LLM, SJD, 2 graduate degrees from the University of Georgia, and I did not plan a long presentation, but I'll probably diverge from it somewhat to answer some of the questions. And thank you for having me, Mr. Chairman. You asked some great questions already, and my 2-minute comments are available from your staff here if anybody wants to peruse them. I didn't go into a whole lot of details, but let me just say that the title of my presentation is Today's Horse Tracks Are Casinos, and they're detracting from Georgia mental health and education statewide if approved. Over more than 30 years, my academic colleagues and I, via studies at Mercer, Emory, UGA, Terry College of Business, nationally. We also participated in the National Gambling Impact Study Commission, which was supported virtually by the entire Georgia congressional delegation. I remember working with Sam Nunn and his office in particular. This goes way back, and it says, don't do this. Don't bring the slot machines in, and I appreciate the admission at the end of the presentation that, and as you brought up, Mr. Chairman, that slot machines are where the action is today. So the conclusion of hundreds of our research documents, analyses, this is just one of 6 bound volumes we call the Red Flag Report on Gambling. And it has about parimutuel wagering in it, also has about horse racing in it. And let me just say that during the 1960s, I grew up near Churchill Downs. I loved Churchill Downs. And my grandkids are equestrians. That's equestrians, not Episcopalians. However, today's horse tracks are a bankrupt business model. And I hate to say this, but they are, unless they're transformed into casinos, which are, you correctly said, are now called racinos. And virtually all of today's horse track revenues are from casino slots, euphemistically termed historical racing machines. The horse track business model today is to buy up failing horse tracks, and virtually all of them were or are failing, including Churchill Downs at one time, and then change those horse tracks into racinos, casinos with slots, while running only a few races per year and often no races at all at the horse tracks. In states where there are no horse tracks, and I have no objections to the presentation we saw here on a localized or semi-regional basis, but we have to look at this strategically, look at it for the whole state. What's going to happen to the whole state? And in states where there are no horse tracks, the strategy of the industry is to state to the legislature that horse tracks will revitalize the dying industry, number one, the dying industry, and we all know it's dying. Everybody knows it's a dying industry. And as tragic as that is, number 2, legalize the tracks. Number 3, show the legislature that the newly legalized tracks are going bankrupt, they're going insolvent, and then transform the tracks into casinos. And we can see the histories, for example, in Iowa of Prairie Meadows horse track. I suggest that you check that out. Go to Virginia, look at Colonial Downs horse track, check that out. Not doing much, if any, race. And in Illinois, where I taught for many years, the horse tracks there are basically now transforming into casinos and are some owned by Churchill Downs. So these electronic slots that are fundamental today to today's horse tracks are known throughout the medical community as the crack cocaine of hooking new addicted gamblers. And that will increase around these areas as people go in and gamble. And I don't have a problem with the pari-mutuel wagering. It's slot machines, slot machines, slot machines, and the industry knows that. They're the crack cocaine. That's where the money comes in. And 90 to 100% of the money going into the tracks at these facilities is going into these machines. This is the revenue that's coming in. And so in these areas, you're going to see addicted gamblers, according to the National Gambling Impact Study Commission, which said don't do this. You'll see adult increases of about 100% in addicted gamblers. You'll see kids now getting addicted at double that rate. And we look at, for example, here's the front cover of Newsweek just a few years ago. They get it. National media gets it. Other states which have not gone this route get it. A gambling addiction is like drug and opioid addiction. According to the American Psychiatric Association, it's officially designated as such in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. The mental health impacts are huge, since they affect not only the addicted and problem gamblers, but like other addictions, they affect 7 to 17 other people. And like other addictions, Racino slot machines will cause significant increases in suicides, child abuse, spousal abuse, bankruptcies, property crimes, sex-related crimes, and then for education. Racino slot machines are philosophically and fiscally detrimental. My grandchildren, I've got 13 grandchildren here in Georgia, they're already asking me why they need to go to school. Because they're being marketed that gambling and gambling on machines is a lucrative profession that they can choose to pursue. Fiscally, big gambling, once you invite it in, is now dominating over half of the 50 states. If you look at Illinois, for example, what are the long-term prognoses for states seduced by big gambling? In the 30 years since casino slots arrived in Illinois, big gambling has been instrumental in taking Illinois from fiscal solvency, and I was there the entire time teaching at the University of Illinois. They now have $165 billion in unfunded liabilities for pensions, for teachers, and for public employees. My wife is a retired Georgia teacher. I'm a retired professor. Public employees, wake up. Once you invite in, you're not inviting in just horse racing. You're inviting in big gambling, and it's going to come right behind all of this. And this also relates to some of the other bills and resolutions that you have. So let me say again, please do not legalize horse tracks. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of manure. And I'd like to thank you, legislators, for your kind attention. And
We
if you
got
have any
just a few
questions, I'll try to
questions.
answer.
Senator Mullis.
Thank you, and thanks for being here today. Now, who are you representing today?
I'm not representing anyone. I'm
I mean, you
representing my
just came
13
on your good
grandkids.
faith?
I'm representing my 13 grandkids.
Now, do you live here in Georgia?
I'm a resident of Georgia.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, let
We
me
have
ask-
retired from Illinois to get out of what's going on in Illinois and to be close to our family.
Let
here.
me tell you also, we're talking about pari-mutuel betting. We're not talking about casino gambling. Are you aware of that?
I am aware of that.
Okay,
but
well, your
they
presentation
can't
was
survive without the
Well,
slots.
I don't know. And you were also saying that all these are failure tracks. Well, I mean, this is private enterprise. There's no incentives from the state or any tax dollars to put these there. I mean, private enterprise, you open a business, it fails. You open a racetrack, it may fail, it may be successful. So why are we monitoring that?
Well, what I'm saying is, if you look at the business model that's occurred throughout the country, and evidently some people have sat through seminars on this, that when the traditional horse track cannot make it on its own today, and needs to have the slots in the track facility.
Well, again, we're not talking about casino gambling. We're talking about horse racing. And I just don't think that we need to be off base on this.
Well, respectfully, I would disagree with you. I don't
And
think
I disagree with you, too.
That's fine.
All
I
right,
understand,
good.
Senator.
So we're through with your
Yeah.
testimony.
Other
Let me
questions?
mention one other thing.
We don't ask questions. We do.
Okay.
So thank you.
Any
if I
other
could-
questions? Senator
Yes.
Harbison.
Thank you. In your presentation, you talked about all the bad things that came out of pari-mutuel betting, and that are there any good examples of, for an example, education funding? Some kind of educational programs about the care of horses, experiences with young people and horses. What is there anything good that came out of in your experience?
Well, it wouldn't be my total experience. I would refer to dozens, literally hundreds of government reports, economics reports, academic reports published throughout this state in concert with academics in this state. There are good PR events that occur from the gambling industry because they know they have an image problem. And so there are a lot of little things where programs will be funded. For example, we'll address problem gamblers. We'll put $10 million a year into a
That's
fund
still
for that.
bad. You still, any one thing, any funding from this that benefit handicapped children, educational students in the state of Illinois, and any good outlook from pari-mutuel betting or horse racing, I should say.
Well, I wouldn't say from pari-mutuel wagering because there's not enough money there. But the gambling industry, the gambling establishment will, in fact, put some monies into various public programs for good PR. So there are some beneficial things that do come out. But the bottom line, sir, Senator, is what is the cost benefit economic analysis showing? And those analyses uniformly for the last 30 years have shown that for each $1 in benefits, and there will be some benefits coming in to the government and some local communities, that the social and economic costs are $3 to $5. Now, those costs aren't really addressed. They're absorbed by society. So society has to absorb the increased suicides. Nevada, by the way, is #1 in suicides. Why would that be? People are losing their money.
Thank you.
All right, Senator Rett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I assume you were referring to horse manure, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, of course.
Well, and these gambling entities, do they set aside some money to help people who might have a problem with gambling? And if so, what is that experience like?
I can absolutely.
And then also, I guess I want to know, is it a small percentage of people that have that problem? Because, I mean, people, we can all go home right now and play the lottery, right? And, but I was just curious.
So, well, you've asked some good questions. The first of all is that the lottery is a slower form of gambling. It's totally different from the electronic gambling, the slot machines, which is where the faster you can gamble, the more problematic they are. I would refer you also to the American Psychiatric Association, their Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which lists all the problems that accrue to people when they get hooked on gambling. Is it possible to get hooked on slower forms of gambling? Yes, but it's the faster forms of gambling, and that's what you find with the historical racing machines at these facilities. And by the way, each one of these machines takes in on average about $50,000 per year. Now, that's a lost economic multiplier. If that was spent in the consumer economy, that would be $150,000 per year being spent on cars, refrigerators, groceries. People around these areas, by the way, are spending 10% less on food, 25% less on clothing. 37% have raided their bank accounts in order to try and chase their losses as they gamble. Now, I know this is not the side of the story that many of you have heard, but this is the majority opinion of 98% of the academics in this country. If they're looking at the strategic cost-benefit analyses of what is going on. And I'm sorry, and I didn't answer one of your questions, but in Illinois, for example, when they brought this in, they did designate that several $1 million would go to treat problem gamblers, but then they didn't fund that. They didn't move the money over there. So it's been an empty account for years and years and years.
But I think whether it's horse racing or the lottery or casino, you're going to have some people who probably have a problem with gambling, but then there's another side where it's benefiting society in terms of education, etc. But I think if they make a good faith effort, well, I'll leave it at that.
Well, one last
point.
Yeah,
We got
last
three
point
other
here.
speakers in
On
that
your the National Gambling Impact Study Commission. By the way, we all testified under oath before this commission. We're not making up any of these numbers. This is all under oath. They said that when you look at society today, think about drug addiction, you have 1 to 1.5% of the public who are hooked on that. Well, now they're saying that you're doubling the number of addicted gamblers, and it's going to be paralleled now to, or becoming parallel to, drug addiction in the number of people and new people who are getting hooked.
I know when I first came to the Senate, these senators, they put a bet on my tenure here. I won't say which way they bet, but I'll leave it at that.
All right, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Taylor Hawkins, Frontline Policy. So Hawkins, you had a handout, and we're going to hand those out.
Sorry, Dylan.
Yes, sir, I did. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. You should be receiving this handout now. Trust you'll study that. We put that together to assist you in noting some of the impacts to our state when we increase or expand gambling in the state. We appreciate Chairman Mullis and Senator Hickman, their work in other areas, but we have opposed gambling expansion in the past, and we will continue to oppose it. And I apologize, I forgot to introduce myself. Taylor Hawkins with Frontline Policy Action. I just want to give you a few of the facts around horse racing. Horse racing has experienced overall an over 50% decline in just the last 2 decades alone, according to a recent report by The Atlantic. Weekly attendance at the fabled Santa Anita in California has dwindled from over 20,000 to fewer than 2,000, now in a stadium built for over 80,000. And NPR reported in 2017 that fewer than 25% of the profits at the racetrack owners come from the track itself. So lest we kid ourselves about where the money's coming from, it's not coming from the horse racing. It's not coming from the sales of tickets. It's not coming from the sales of other items there at the track. It's coming from the gambling and the betting that goes along with it. Let's talk about the health issues as well. Horse racing has the highest concussion rate of any sport, including American football, according to a 2020 report by NPR. Over 24 horses a week die at racetracks in the United States, and Senator Hickman mentioned the tragic nature of having one of your animals die in your presence. Well, more than 1,400 horses died at tracks in Pennsylvania alone in a 9-year period between 2010 and 2019. That's just Pennsylvania, 1,400 horses, and that's because of the drugging that happens in the industry and other things as well. In just a 3-year study alone, over 3,800 horses tested positive for illegal drugs. Many of them are untested. That's why that number's not higher. But you've heard a lot about the money this will bring the state and the big promises of big revenue increases. But I would ask the committee, at what cost? Because you are looking at an increase in gambling addictions in the state. And gambling addiction, as Professor Kent mentioned, is on par with opioid addiction. in the DSM-5, but it's not only on par with opioid addiction by classification, it's actually above opioid addiction in percentage of overall suicide. Between a percentage of those who take opioids for chronic pain who will develop a use disorder is between 8 and 12%. So for every 1,000 opioid users, you'd see on average about 80 to 120 addicts. But of those who gamble in the United States, on average, you're looking at an addiction rate of between 12 and 20%. So much higher addiction rate and much higher suicidality rate as well. And I would just submit before this committee that we do not want to see that increase in our state. Suicide is already the second leading cause of death for people under the age of 35 in the United States. And the gambling expansion that comes with this type of legalization will dramatically increase that. Bringing horse racing to Georgia means bringing a dying industry that survives only based on predatory gambling practices that prey on the poor and minority communities in our state. And I would respectfully, as I said, submit to this committee that we're not, that is not something we want to bring to this state. So I appreciate y'all's consideration.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. We've got a question from Senator Lucas. What's your number, Senator? 2. All right. Your mic is on.
If you make that statement as to what it would bring and worse than opioid, what happened with the Georgia lottery? What did it do for the state? And that's gambling. There ain't no question about it. You pay for a chance. That is gambling. Has it brought those kind of things to Georgia outside of the billions of dollars that we spend in education?
Well, you're looking at a massive number of addicted gamblers in Georgia, and whether that comes from the lottery, whether that comes from illegal online sports betting that already takes place, or whatever that comes from, you're looking at bankruptcy issues and problems. And when you're driving down the interstate and you pass the billboard that says, the Moneyball's up to $720 million or whatever that number is, you gotta remember where that money comes from. You're talking about a vast majority of poor and minority folks who participate in that. And so, can we talk about all the great things we've done with Hope? Absolutely, and I think Hope is a fantastic thing. But I would disagree
as you make those statements, do you know what Bolita was? Bolita.
Not familiar with that, no, sir.
Well, see, you don't know nothing about the minority community then.
I'm not claiming to speak for the minority community,
you just made a statement. We did it back when it wasn't legal, and the numbers came out the stock market, and you paid a penny, 2 pennies, or 3 pennies on it. My grandmama, she had no mental problems. She lived a nice life, but she played Bolita, and that went to the odds maker. That were those folks who picked up the numbers, who backed the numbers. It was a chance. The only thing you worried about, if you hit it big, whether or not the number man was gonna pay you money, because you couldn't go to the police about it.
I hear you, yes, sir, Senator. And to your point, majority of those who gamble or who participate in the lottery are not going to become addicted. But we also have to look at percentages. And overall, like I said, I was not claiming to speak for the minority community. I just look at the facts and the statistics around gambling and around the lottery, as you mentioned. And the fact is that the vast majority of those of the money that's going into the lottery, for instance, Clayton County sees an average of 4 cents on the dollar for every dollar spent on the lottery in Clayton County. They see only 4 cents, yes, sir, returned to the county. But Fulton County sees, I'm sorry, not Fulton County. Oconee County, one of the richest counties in the state, sees on average a 54% revenue return to that area, to their area with every dollar spent on the lottery. So I'm just talking about the facts. We're not claiming to speak for the minority community.
Thanks, sir. Chairman Mullis, number 4.
Thank you for being here.
Yes, sir.
Now, where did you go to school?
Truett McConnell University in North Georgia.
Okay. Did you have any Hope Scholarship funds?
I did not, no, sir.
And do you know anybody in your family who has?
Not in my family, no, sir.
Well, you don't know anybody that's ever received Hope Scholarship?
I've got friends who have, yes, sir.
Okay. Did they attempt suicide or any other kind of thing because they received their education through gambling?
Absolutely not, sir.
Exactly.
I wasn't connecting suicidality to hope.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions for Mr. Hawkins? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Hawkins.
Thank you very
Appreciate you being with us.
Yes, sir.
Next, Mike Griffin. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You have the floor.
Or subcommittee chairman, or
Assistant Chairman. My name is
Vice
Mike
Chairman.
Griffin. I'm the Public Affairs Representative of the Georgia Baptist Mission Board. And I feel like a Dolly Parton song here, Here You Come Again. But anyway, yeah, read that whole song through. Anyway, I've been doing this for a long time. That is dealing with opposing gambling. Isn't that right, Senator Beach? And I can also prove that, you know, good people with good motives can disagree. And that's definitely, I am friends with all the authors of this legislation here today. And about 9 years I've been speaking against. I've been down here at the Capitol for 15, pastored for over 35 and a half years in this state. So I've seen more on social issues. I know what I'm talking about. When I started dealing with this years ago, and we talked about horse racing, that's what they were talking about, horse racing. But today, this pig has got lipstick on it, because this is really not about horse racing anymore. It's all about historical horse racing machines. It's about off-track betting sites. It's going to eventually allow you to be able to develop an account. I don't know if have any of you read the legislation? I'm not trying to be offensive, but I have sit through hearings already on this. So this legislation is not just about gathering up a group of horses and racing. It's going to involve other things. Now, you can take your iPhone out right now, and I can prove to you 40 tracks have closed since 2000, and you can just look at it and see. You can also take your iPhone and just say historic horse racing machines. Look them up. It looks just like you're in a casino. I mean, it doesn't look any different. And I've got here in my hands an article that I didn't write, but in 2018, Virginia brought back horse racing. Let me tell you why. Because the governor and others moved so that they could bring in historical horse racing machines and other types of venues so that they could bring their horse racing industry back up again. You know why? Because they closed it down in 2015. They started in 1997, and they were running 2,300 thoroughbreds that first year. The year before they closed, they were down to 300. So my point is, they were not making it off of pure horse racing. And then also Churchill Downs, who has sold out to a Chicago-based organization called Revolutionary Racing. And they have had to bring in these same types of additional types of gambling to be able to help Churchill Downs. I mean, really, I'm just saying it's just not what we may be hearing here today. It's going to involve absolutely a lot more. And I'm just very concerned that it's also going to lead to, again, casino gambling. It's going to continue to lead to Indian tribes are going to continue to look at moving in as well. I'm just saying we do have a problem in our state. We do have gambling already that's legal. Before my senator friend asked me that same question, he asked me every time. But I've had cancer. Have any of you? And I'm going to tell you one thing, I don't want it moving around my body. And if I can't get rid of it, I want to keep it in one spot. And we do have a cancer here already. And not just the lottery, but what we knew and what I knew as a pastor and dealing with years ago, and that is dealing with the casino type, you know, the video poker machines that we have, which they get on to me if I ever call them that anymore, because they're COAMs. We already got little ones already in our little, in our stores and our gas stations already that we're dealing with. I understand that. We just can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And so I'd ask this committee to hold off on this. Let's not put this on the ballot. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mike. Any questions for Mr. Griffin? Chairman Mullis.
Yes, my
I
good
know I'm
friend.
doing good when
And
Senator
I do
Mullis
appreciate
asks me a
Mike.
question.
I do appreciate Mike Griffin, even though he may not think I do. I do. I appreciate it. Now, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but we've recently been in a pandemic with COVID-19. Do you think any of that could have any bearing on some of these tracks and stores and businesses closing?
Well, these tracks have been closing since 2000, so I think it was before the pandemic.
Okay, so you wouldn't say that it escalated any of the closings, perhaps?
Well, it's escalated closings. In
Okay,
a
that's
lot
all I
of
needed to hear.
things.
That's all I
And
needed.
a lot of things, categorically, yes.
Any other
Thank
questions for Mr. Griffin?
Thank you.
All right,
Thank
Mike,
you.
thank
Thank
you
you
for
for
being
being-
with us today. And Mr. Paul Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Paul Smith, Executive Director of Citizen Impact. We are a network of pastors and Christian ministries across the state. Like my friend Mike Griffin, I've been speaking out against all forms of gambling for 8, 9, 10 legislative sessions now, including horse racing, casinos, sports wagering on your phone, and just earlier this afternoon testified against betting on cockfighting and other forms of illegal gambling, trying to be consistent in our opposition of that. Because I've spoken so many times, because the hour is late, I will not belabor all the things that my friends have said and fellow opponents have said. I'll just close with this comment. 2 days ago, we had our organization's annual Pastors and Ministry Leaders Day. We had about 100 faith leaders from all over Georgia, and I speak for them and for others in our network when I say we're adamantly opposed further expansion of gambling. And as we consider what few people deny, that this will bring addiction and bankruptcy and broken homes, I just remind the committee that it's our pastors who, in these churches, who are going to be dealing with that fallout. So thank you for taking my testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Yes, sir. Senator Lucas, you're recognized.
You a minister.
Yes, sir.
Do y'all ever have bake sales or raffles for the church?
No, sir.
Beg your pardon?
No, sir.
Well, what happens when I see churches raffle tickets? That's buying a ticket for a chance to win a color television or something for a cause in the church to benefit the church.
You have experience with that. I do not. We do not do that in our church.
Any other questions? Yes, sir. Senator, what is your mic number? All right. You're on.
Just one observation. The previous speaker, Pastor Griffin, and yourself, it seemed to me, as it relates to the maybe decline of the horse racing alone, and the growth of the machine is probably technologically driven. It's where we are today. People playing games online. There's huge tournaments, and it's huge. As a matter of fact, money is from that. It's a big system, and I think you're talking about the growth in technology and where society is sort of going in that direction, and that probably complements that kind of growth more than anything else. And I would just be aware of that. It's just where society is sort of shifting, and
I think we're seeing that with the gambling on the phone app. That's
Yes.
advancement of technology, and I think just like my friends have testified, that not only are the machines tend to, contribute to more and more gambling, the gambling on the phone seems to be even worse, just quicker gambling.
Yes, sir.
So thank you for your time.
Thank you. That wraps up all the speakers that have signed up to speak today. Appreciate all of your attention and input here. Senator Beach, sorry we didn't have time on this schedule for you to go into the details of the bill. We'll save that. We'll conclude public input with this hearing, and if we have time in our schedule, we'll try to have an additional hearing for you to go into the nuts and bolts of your legislation, and of course Senator Mullis's as well. I think they're very similar. They're very similar, but same concept. We're going to proceed on Tuesday of next week at 3 o'clock back to our agenda from last Tuesday. What was it, 420 and 421? I want to hear those two bills on Tuesday. There may be one other one we'll put on there, but those two for sure. And then I have on next Thursday, we're going to hear Senate Bill 495. and that involves ticket brokers and non-transferable tickets. I've also had a request from Senator Mullis to hear 492. May not get it next week, but we will the week after. That's your one on public utilities and transportation, the deployment of electric vehicle charging equipment.
Oh, yeah, great. Are there any casino gambling machines in it?
The COAM machines will probably be right next to them. All right, thank y'all so much for being here. Everybody have a good weekend. We're adjourned.